Madam Secretary, I want to read the story that was on the front page of the New York Times, September 18th this year. The story is entitled, "Family Pond Boils at Center of Regulatory War in Wyoming." Regulatory war in Wyoming. The story highlights the plight of a young man, Andy Johnson. He's 32. He's a welder. He is a part-time caterer. He's a father of 4 girls, lives in Fort Bridger, Wyoming. The article talks about a pond that Mr. Johnson built on his property. The EPA now says violates the Clean Water Act and that he should have gotten a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, Wyoming has already said it's okay to do this, but the Army Corps of Engineers. The article says, Mr. Johnson and his wife spent $50,000, most of their savings, to create a pond of water to help his 10 head of cattle and 4 horses. Now, this is the front page of the New York Times because of what's going on with the regulatory war in this country. Mr. Johnson and his family have been threatened with fines, $37,500 a day, thanks to the EPA and the Corps' heavy-handed management of water policy. Article states the family has accrued fines of as much as $16 million. He sold off most of his livestock to pay his legal fees, environmental studies. Something terribly wrong with the EPA and your agency where you destroy people's lives over a pond. A pond. You may claim your rule and regulatory approach is based on science, but it certainly is not based on common sense. And I don't want to see this happen to any more Wyoming families, families anywhere in the country where, why should any family trust the EPA or the Corps with this Waters of the United States rule that will ultimately empower unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats to steamroll families, take their college savings, clean out their retirement accounts? This is abysmal. And when the EPA, through its actions, gets talked into the front page of the New York Times with an article about Wyoming, you can tell how much overreach there is here. Any answer to this?
Senator, I believe that the clean water rule that we've promulgated will help to improve the clarity for those people who have questions about the reach of the clean water rule. I think the science has demonstrated that there's connectivity between different bodies of water, and that's an important consideration when we decide whether an activity should be permitted or not in a jurisdictional water.
The $16 million fine against this Wyoming family, 32-year-old family of 4 daughters, wants to get them to college. You're going to provide better clarity to them? Is that what you just said?
That's what we intend to do in this rule.
It's pretty clear when they have a $16 million fine that the EPA certainly thinks that they have the authority to do this. There's so much in these Army Corps memos that Senator Sullivan started. Describe how your agency was essentially out of the loop in a lot of the decision-making that went into developing this rule. I've been very critical of how this rule has been drafted, very critical of how agencies like the EPA have applied a heavy hand to farmers, to ranchers, to small businesses in their management of water. I can only imagine how many families like the Johnsons have already been bullied by bureaucrats, having their livelihoods threatened, simply putting a shovel into the ground. So statements in the Corps memo about the EPA's conclusions like, the Corps was not part of any type of analysis to reach the conclusions described, means the EPA was really driving the train, not the Corps. And without the Corps' involvement, it appears to me the rule that was developed is completely arbitrary. I mean, the Corps' own memo says, in the Corps' judgment, the documents contain numerous inappropriate assumptions with no connection to the data provided, misapplied data, analytical deficiencies, logical inconsistencies. As a result, the Corps review could not find a justifiable basis in the analysis for many of the document's conclusions. So I want to give you the opportunity to state whether you feel your agency is pushed around, marginalized by the EPA, because that's what your own people are saying about these memos.
I do not believe that we were pushed around, bullied, or marginalized by any other federal agency during this process.
So the people that work for you are wrong?
No, the people who work for me, who are in the Corps of Engineers, had some differing opinions on some of the final decisions that needed to be made in order to finalize this rule.
So a district court judge in North Dakota concluded that the process used to develop the rule is inexplicably arbitrary and devoid of a reasoned process. The judge issued a preliminary injunction preventing the rule from going into effect in 13 states, including Wyoming. And if you truly want to provide certainty and clarity, you'll withdraw this rule and start over with a process that reaches out to states and local governments and is not arbitrary and devoid of a reasoned process. That's why I would ask that you support bipartisan legislation that we have introduced. Bipartisan, we have Democrat co-sponsors, It's not just those on the right side of the panel, bipartisan co-sponsors. It's called the Federal Water Quality Protection Act. It gives your agency a chance to go back, write a rule, reaches out to states, protects vulnerable farmers, ranchers, families, and communities.
We are currently implementing the rule as proposed but for in those 13 states, Senator.
Yeah, Mr.
And we
Chair-
stand behind that rule.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to continue to work with the majority leader and when getting a vote on this bipartisan legislation so we can get it to the floor and rewrite the rule. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.